I try to do my best. Laboratory, the mathematic application function, apply mathematics. Okay. Please welcome Dr. Sebastian Ler.
Okay, don't need. Don't need, I'm going to shorten my talk. Because I gave her 10 minutes. So I'm going to talk to you about a funny application. It's an application that you can download on the internet and that you can install on your mobile phone. And then from that application, what you can do is you can say what you have in your fridge. And according to what you have in your fridge, if you want to save the food that is in your fridge, the computer is going to suggest you some recipe. So this is what I'm going to present. And what we want is we want to know who are the active users of this application. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit about that and why we are interested into the active users. Because the thing is, the people who are doing that, okay, it's a startup. So do you know I would say the definition of what is a startup? I think that you all know. I mean, if you want to summarize, it's I would say a regular company for which the business model is not very clear. Okay, so here, if you download the application, of course, the application is free. Okay, and you can use the application for free. But then these people, they work a lot to promote this application. So how can they get the money? So maybe you should ask yourself, how can I get the money from that? But if they knew how to get the money, then it's not a startup anymore. It's a regular business, okay? But in that case, they're still looking for their business model. That's the main point. So of course, they're getting the money from the users of this application. And from the users of the application, actually, I'm going to tell you how it works. Once you get the money from the users, the only thing that you can get from the users is data from the users, okay? So if you download an application on the internet, and if you use this application, I'm going to show you how people can make money from that. So here, on the first screen, okay, the computer, the application, is giving you examples of food that you may have in your fridge, okay? And then you're going to enter all the different kind of food that you have in your fridge. And then it's going to suggest you some recipes, okay? But you're going to say, okay, I want a recipe that focuses on this particular kind of food. So I have, let's say, corn. So what can you have in terms of recipes with corn? And then the computer is going to mix that keyword corn with all the things that you have in your fridge, okay? And once you do that, the computer is going to propose you a bunch of recipes, okay? So corn and all the different ingredients, and then the computer is going to give you some kind of recipes. And then this is how you're going to get some money from the consumers. Once you have the recipes, okay, here you have a bread on this particular ingredient. So the computer is going to say, okay, if you want to do that recipe, maybe you should use that particular broccoli, or maybe you should use that particular brand to do that recipe. Okay. So let's think about that. You're a company, okay? You're selling broccolis, for instance. How much do you want to pay for that kind of thing? You want to pay if you know that people are using that application, okay? But how do you know they're using that application? How do you know that these people are effectively doing the recipe with the broccolis that you're selling? That's the main thing. So remember, people, they're producing these applications. You don't pay for these kind of applications, but each time you use the application, they collect data from you. And they collect data from you to sell these data. Because people like you who are producing food, they want to get insight from the consumers. So that's the main story. So here, the idea is, okay, what about the data? We're going to think, what about the data? Each time you use an application, each time you touch the screen of your mobile phone, this is what we call a log. So I know exactly on which part of the screen you've touched the screen, okay? So if you push the corner of the screen here, I will know. I will know when you're going to push that part of the screen. I will know how long you stay on that page. So the data that we have collected is the data that are related to the usage of the application. So I know your behavior regarding the application. Okay, so that's the main point. And then we have data related to the consumers. I know where you live. Because if you use the application, I know where you live. And I know when and where you were at, let's say, yesterday at 7, okay? So I have data related to the consumers, I have data related to the way you use the application, and then I have data related to the recipes, of course, because that's the recipes that I'm suggesting to you, and I have data related to your fridge, okay? So what are we going to do with all this data? That's the thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to separate you people into classes, okay? I'm going to classify you two in terms of one part is the users of the applications, and the other one is the visitors. Of course, if I want to sell my application, I'm going to say that my application has been downloaded 1 million times, okay? But even though you have downloaded an application, you know that maybe you're not using it, okay? So I really have to find a way to separate the users from the visitors. So I'm sure that you have understood why we need to separate the users from the visitors, because actually the value of the application depends on the number of users and not on the numbers of downloaders, okay? And if I can prove that I have a lot of users, then I can tell to people, okay, if you want to brand your product, as I have like 500,000 followers, 500,000 people who can do the recipes, then you can put as a commercial your product in my application. And that's how I can get money from you, okay? So, how can we separate the users from the visitors? This is what I'm going to explain, and I'm going to explain what we can do once we have separated the users from the visitors. So, remember, you're here, you download the application, and my job is to try to understand which one of these two people you are, okay? So, we have to make assumptions. So we have to define, in terms of behavior, what could be an active user, okay? So, an active user could be, by definition, someone who has more than 30 modifications. 30 modifications means that, okay, you have updated your fridge more than 30 times. Let's say that you say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to fill my fridge like this, but maybe next week I'm going to change the content of my fridge. That's a modification, okay? So each time you update your fridge, it's a modification. Or, so that's an easy one. Because remember, I record everything, okay? I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying, okay, people, they record what you do. Or, I can define an active user as someone who has made more than one recipe, right? Because if you make recipes, that means that you're using the applications, and that means that you're doing your recipe, right? So the thing is, how can I know that you have effectively made a recipe? So that's the trick. So I'm going to define the active user as this kind of person, or this person who have made more than one recipe. But of course, I'm not in your kitchen, I'm not in your mobile phone, and I don't know whether you've made the recipe or not. So what do? We record all the logs. So that means that we have millions and millions of logs, really. So it's really a big data. So from these millions and millions of logs, what we do is we analyze each logs every day, every hour, and we analyze all the different variables that we can measure from the log. But really, we don't have a lot of things, okay? Because all we can record is each time you change from one window to the other. We can record the number of times that you spend on one window. We can record the position of your fingers eventually. We can record when you just click somewhere. And here, on this output, this is the number of times, okay, where the applications has been used, okay, according to the hour of the day, okay? So I can see here the distributions of the log according to the hour of the day. And I can see here that my application has been used between 3 p.m. and 8 p.m., okay? So that's the kind of information that I can get from what I record, okay? Analysis per day, analysis for each hour of the day, favorite recipes, time spent on each one of the recipes. So still, I have to define who is the user who has cooked more than one recipe. So I'm going to make some kind of scenarios, okay? And I'm going to try to understand in terms of usage, who can be that user, okay? So if I say the day of the week is Thursday, time of the day is 7 p.m., okay? He has clicked on a favorite recipe, and he has spent 34 minutes on one page, okay? So maybe I can consider that this last recipe has been done, okay? So according to some criteria, what I'm going to do is I'm going to consider whether this recipe has been done or not. So we're going to consider as many scenarios as possible. So another scenario would be day of the week, Saturday, time of the day, 2. He has no clicked on any favorite, okay? And time spent on this page is 0 minutes. So probably I'm going to consider that the recipe has not been done, okay? So actually, from the few variables, actually I have many lines, millions of lines, but I have very few variables, okay? Because we cannot really record the usage. We can try to transform the data that we record in terms of usage, okay? So these data are the data that I have transformed, okay, from your usage of your mobile phone, okay? Now, day of the week is Thursday, time of the day is 11 p.m., favorite, no favorite, but you spent 4 minutes on the page. So probably, maybe, you have been a user, and maybe you have cooked that recipe. So we record the data, we transform the data, and we try to evaluate the probability for you to have cooked the recipe or not. So we're going to examine each log, and not exactly each log, but maybe thousands of logs, okay? And we're going to build our expertise in terms of you've made the recipe or not. And then we're going to label the data. That's really important. So at the very beginning, my lines, they have not been labeled. I don't know whether you have cooked or not, okay? It's impossible for me to know if you have cooked or not. So once I have labeled the data, then I can separate the data into 2 groups according to my expertise, okay? So we have trained people for that. So I took 4 people and I asked them to assess thousands of logs, okay? And I have asked them to say, okay, whether this log corresponds to a recipe that has been cooked or not. So based on our expertise, we supposedly know whether someone has realized the recipe. Okay? So we managed to label manually thousands of lines. Okay? At the very beginning, you have to do that because you have no information on your logs. Okay? And once we do that, I'm going to come back to yesterday, because yesterday I tried to explain something about machine learning, and I wanted to show you two different ways and the main difference between these two things. Okay, so that was my introduction to classification. Remember yesterday? And yesterday I said that we want to predict if this individual will default or not. And here, for this method, okay, we have parameters, and that's really important because here, the computer is going to give you an estimation of these parameters. That means that for this kind of method, you have a numbers for these two parameters, okay? For this one, you have a number. For this one, you have a number. Now, I talked to you about this method, the KNN classifier. For this, you don't have any numbers. So that means that the way the computer has classified, you cannot really tell how he did. So that's the main difference between the first method and the second one. The first method is interpretable, while the second one is not. It's like a black box. So the thing is, in machine learning, you have a balance that you have to respect between interpretability and accuracy, okay? And of course, you always try to say, okay, which method is the most accurate? Because I really want to predict whether you have that very hard type of disease or not. But if I want to predict whether you have that disease or not, maybe I can be accurate. But if I have no way to interpret the way I've classified you, maybe it's not going to be useful. I may be very accurate, but if I have no way to check whether my prediction makes sense or not, okay, it's not going to be really helpful. So the decision that you take, in some situation, accuracy may not be sufficient. You really have to understand what's going on, okay? So in the first situation, with my beta 0 and beta 1, as you have parameters and as you have numbers, maybe these numbers can be interpretable, okay? In the KNN situations, the computer is going to do that by himself, and this situation, you cannot know exactly how he did that. So we're going to choose a method which is in between these two, in between, I would say, the logistic regression and the KNN method. And this in between is called a decision tree, okay? And maybe you've heard of that, but this is a very example of a decision tree, okay? Am I hungry? Yes, no. And then you cut your tree into two. And then if you're not hungry, then you go to sleep, okay? It's 5:30, you go to sleep, you're tired. If you're hungry, if you have $25 in your pocket, if you do have that, you go to the restaurant. Otherwise, you cook by yourself, right? Okay, so that's the end of the story. So we're going to use that kind of technique, okay, to classify our people. And then we're going to use the rule to check whether the way the computer has classified the people makes sense or not. That's really important, okay? Because otherwise you have no control. So this is what we do. So we run decision trees. Actually, we've run a variant, like random forest, on the data. But remember, we have labeled the data. And then what we do is we realize that in order to classify users versus visitors, the important variables was the time spent on the recipe, of course, the day that they looked at the applications, because Monday in France, of course, Monday is totally different from Sunday, but you would use the application differently. The time of the day, if the recipe has been already consulted, the fire rate and the high score and so on. So based on that, okay, we can assume that our machine learning strategies in order to classify users versus visitors can work, okay? So that's the main work. So now we can check which one is the users and which one is the visitors. So among the million of people who have downloaded the applications, we know how many of them are using the applications. So what's next? So what's next is we can work on a recommendation system. So you all know what is a recommendation system, right? If you go to Amazon, you buy things, and the next time you go to Amazon, then the computer is going to suggest you something. If you go to Netflix and you're watching some kind of series, okay, the computer is going to suggest you another series very similar. And now I'm going to show you what we can do with the data that we have collected. So here, this is the point of view. And I'm going to show you, once we have the information on the user, what kind of recommendation system we can do. But if you don't have the information on the user, it's dead, okay? You cannot do that. So let's think about a recipe. For a given recipe, it's I put the name of the recipe in French because I think it's more chic. Okay, but actually it's a French application. So tartare de légumes means tartare. You know what it is? Tartare means when you eat things raw. Okay, and légumes means vegetables. Actually, it's like a salad, right? So, but it sounds more fancy. Tartare de légumes. This is vegetables. Okay, and you have to differentiate now. These people who have consulted the recipe, they have looked at the recipe. We know that they have looked at the recipe from the people who have cooked the recipe. But these two people are the users. Now, I don't have any visitors anymore. I'm working only with the users, okay? And now, for those people who have consulted the recipe, tartare de légumes, I can see, okay, what are the other recipes that they have consulted. And also, I can see what are the other recipes that they have cooked. So here, tartare de légumes comes with tarte aux légumes, tart, okay? And carpaccio végétal, which is also similar to tartare de légumes. And then, for those people who have cooked the recipe, okay, I can differentiate the recipes that have been consulted and the recipes also that have been cooked. So here, you are user, you have consulted tartare de légumes, and here, this is what you have consulted, and this is what you have made, okay? So now what I'm going to do, and it's another machine learning method based on dimension reduction. What I can do is I can calculate from dimension reduction techniques, I can calculate a distance matrix between all the recipes. So here, my recipe is tartare de légumes, and I'm going to check the closest recipe from this one based on my former information, okay? So here, of course, tartare de légumes, the distance is equal to 0 because it's the same recipe. And now I'm going to see which one is the closest. And the closest is tarte aux légumes. So I'm mixing all the information from those people who have made the recipe and those people who have consulted